Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got a great show for you to kick off the week. Donald Trump will be making history today, by the way, becoming the first former president to stand trial in a criminal case. In just hours, the jury selection is set to begin in the Stormy Daniels hush money trial. But before we get into that, the former president also has embraced the Genocide Joe slogan that originated from progressive circles. Let's take a listen to that. Trump opened his rally in Schnecksville, Pennsylvania, with scathing remarks about the October 7th Hamas attack and Iran's barrage of missile strikes against targets in Israel, blasting President Biden's leadership as weak for enabling the Israel-Hamas war.
Trump's attacks on Biden come on the heels of the hush money trial, the first of 4 criminal cases in New York City, which will start today and could last 6 to 8 weeks. The blockbuster case stems from payments then-Trump fixer Michael Cohen made to adult entertainer Stormy Daniels to stay quiet about claims she made that she had an affair with Trump in 2006. Cohen allegedly paid her $130,000 leading up to the 2016 election, which Trump reimbursed him for after he won. Will a conviction of Trump impact his prospects in November? That's the $64 million question. GOP New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu doesn't think so. Here's what he told George Stephanopoulos on ABC this week, Sunday.
This trial is not going to have major political ramifications that a lot of people, I think it may have. When it comes to these issues, people see it more as reality TV at this point. They really do. And so, whether it's a conviction or what that conviction looks like, a lot of folks, they conflate all 4 of these different trials that he's in. I don't think it's good that he's going to be in the court, have to be in there probably 3 days a week, for a number of weeks. That takes him off the campaign trail. He'll probably go back on the campaign trail and almost like rehash what's going on. He'll try to victimize it. And that has worked for him, right? I mean, this has been going on for over a year, and his poll numbers never seem to go down because of the issue.
Now, 55% of registered voters said a Trump conviction in the hush money case would make no difference on how they vote in November, and 29% said they'd be less likely to vote for him. This according to a recent Quinnipiac University poll.
All right. Lots to get into.
Just getting it out of the way, that Donald Trump clip went viral, and for good reason. One, how surprised were you to hear a Trump audience, a conservative MAGA audience, picking up a chant of Genocide Joe, seemingly rooting their concerns about Joe Biden, not in his age or Hunter Biden corruption or any of the other issues which have been foregrounded by the Republican Party this season, but by expressing discontent with how he's backing Israel in its siege on Gaza.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible to hear that from a Trump crowd, and it makes one wonder whether that will have some kind of influence on what Trump's policy would be with respect to the Middle East. Obviously, we've been talking in recent weeks about him sounding a difficult-ish to read, but a note that is being perceived by very pro-Israel people to be actually hostile to their perspective. He has urged Netanyahu to, wrap this up, get it done, etc. And get it done can be do this war even harder and more aggressively, or it could be read as this needs to be brought to a close. I think Trump absolutely understands that the optics of it are bad for Biden, that it's hurting him. And so I'm not actually surprised that he's leaning into that rhetoric as well, but it goes to show that you could have a very different foreign policy under Donald Trump. We don't really know.
I would be very skeptical about there being any substantive policy shift because we saw how his foreign policy toward Israel was when he was president for 4 years.
But that was before Netanyahu congratulated Joe Biden on winning the presidency.
Well, I would really caution voters to look very closely at what Donald Trump's record is. He really exploits the fact that there is ambiguity around his positions, that the reporters he's willing to sit down with, on the rare occasion that he sits down with real journalists for an adversarial interview, are very sympathetic to him politically, very rarely ask him about the kinds of questions that would be divisive to his audience. And so if you are sincerely concerned about what's going on in Gaza, you should realize that perhaps neither Joe Biden or Donald Trump is the candidate for you. But what I think Donald Trump does get credit for here is having a much better read of what the culture attitudes are, the public attitudes are about these things, and taking rhetorical shifts that are more effective than the ones that Joe Biden is taking. And so responding in that real-time way to an audience, it comes off as kind of authentic. They're not wrong.
Yeah.
It's almost like a sitcom bit.
Yeah.
Seinfeld. They're not wrong.
Yeah.
You know, what are you going to do? And I do wonder if that rhetorical shift from Donald Trump will start to put even more pressure on Joe Biden, regardless of whether or not it's sincere on a policy basis. What do you then make of some of these other troubles that are still following Donald Trump around? I know the polls show that most voters wouldn't change their mind based on the outcome of this case.
Yeah,
but that
especially
doesn't mean
this case.
But if 29% of voters still would, that's a substantial chunk of voters that could obviously throw an election for Joe Biden.
That's what they say, but I really agree, frankly, with what the Governor Sununu was saying there. It's not shown a lot of change in the polls, the outcomes of these trials. And this trial is the one so many people think is a weak case, involves long ago matters, whether it even counts as a campaign. I mean, you have Michael Avenatti, not out there, in prison actually, saying he thinks the case is weaker and Stormy Daniels misled him about the reality of it. So I don't think politically this one matters at all, but it will distract Trump in the way Sununu pointed out, that he has to appear in court instead of giving rallies, giving speeches, visiting the swing states where he needs to up his numbers. So I think it's going to have an effect in that way. I don't think the outcome changes anybody's minds.
I also do wonder how much of the bad optics around this and his other indictments is affecting the decision about whether or not he's going to be willing to submit to a debate. Both Joe Biden and Donald Trump, for different reasons, seem to be participating in some kind of posturing about, well, it's the other person's fault that we're not going to be engaged in a debate, when they both have pretty significant incentives not to want to be confronted directly on a stage about certain things that have been going on, whether it's Biden and Gaza, whether it's Trump and all of these criminal indictments. There are good reasons that both of them would want to just maintain a status quo and not be pushed directly on some of these subjects. And so I do wish, frankly, there were a world, I think democracy is better served by a world in which we actually know what our options are, a world in which we know whether or not Joe Biden can have the stamina to persist through a lengthy debate as opposed to the more controlled environment of a State of the Union where he's reading from a teleprompter and the like. And I do wonder if Trump might be more aggressive about pushing for a debate if it weren't for the fact that he was perhaps insecure about how his optics are going to be shifting around some of these criminal matters.
Yeah, the fact that you don't hear from either of these two nearly as much as you used to has some bearing on this next bit I wanted to get to. So love it or hate it, Trump's sharp tongue has led to some of the spiciest headlines, from a political official. Now, a survey, however, was published about whether voters were offended by what Trump has said recently. And this is what's interesting. 52% of young voters, that's ages 18 to 29, said he hasn't been offensive as of late, according to this New York Times Siena College poll. So this is a prevailing attitude among young people that, yes, Trump is offensive, but I can't think of him saying something offensive lately.
Yeah.
Which, frankly, is probably good for him. Just compare that to sort of the media attitude about Trump and how he's just this gross, racist, sexist, immigrant, SHIT whole countries, that kind of thing. That is not, like, people, that's still in the back of their head, but there's nothing new on that front, is what voters are saying.
Well, what's new is him saying things that, frankly, are going to seem very base to that age range that was polled there in that question. Young voters are going to think it's pretty base for him to acknowledge that Genocide Joe is, in fact, Genocide Joe. We shouldn't skip over how widely outside mainstream coverage that sort of framing is. And here, the former president of the United States of America is corroborating that worldview on one of the largest platforms in the country, his own presidential campaign platform, saying, yes, Genocide Joe, you're not wrong.
No. Well, we are obviously going to talk more about what's going on in the Middle East. We've got some great guests on the show today. We'll be back with more Rising right after this.